Hello, and welcome to the Functional Nurse Academy podcast. This is your host, Melissa Schreibfetter, owner and founder of the Functional Nurse Academy. Welcome, everyone. I have another one of my students from the Functional Nurse Academy that is joining me today. I have with me Jamie, who is a former ER nurse who left her career as a travel nurse to open up her own functional health consulting business back in March of 2025. After suffering from years of burnout and dealing with a mysterious chronic illness while working at the bedside, she discovered the concept of functional medicine and went all in on healing herself, and now is helping other nurses create ethical businesses away from the bedside without sacrificing their mental and physical health. She is also a part-time nursing school educator, military wife, and world traveler. Creating her own business in functional medicine has changed her life, and now she shares with others how to do the same. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it is so great to connect with you all. And to our listeners, I actually connected with Jamie a few months back because I think that I all of a sudden I started getting, referrals from you for the Functional Nurse Academy. And I was like, okay, like this is amazing. I need to reach out to this person. And now you're one of our students. And when I started to learn about you, and you have such a unique story. I mean, I feel like so many of us that leave conventional soul sucking medicine and then start practicing a different way. It's like opening up a whole different world to nursing. And I would love for you to tell our listeners about your background and what changed in your life that led you to functional medicine.
Yeah. So I started my nursing career back. I started nursing school in 2017. Um, I had no idea what I wanted to do as far as, the first semester of nursing school, everybody's like, I want to be L&D or I'm the ICU, or, I was one of those ones like, I have no idea. I guess we'll figure it out along the way. And then after my second semester, I was on a bachelorette party for one of my best friends. We were coming home from Savannah, Georgia, and I got into an automobile accident. It was a head-on collision. There were 8 people total in the accident, and half of them had passed. Out of the ones that survived, I was the one who was hurt the most. So I had a lot of injuries. I ended up being in a wheelchair for quite some time, almost 3.5 months. I couldn't walk correctly for about 6 months. And that took me out of nursing school. But from that, I was like, yeah, I want to be trauma, ICU or ER. Um, and so that was kind of where my path led into figuring out what I wanted to do once I was able to go back into nursing school and to finish it. And then started brand new grad in the ER in my community hospital. And I was there for about a year and 4 months. And right at 9 months in, COVID hit. And it was like everything just went wonky. And it was like apocalyptic. It was just, there was nobody in the hospitals for weeks at a time. And then if there were, everybody was sick and dying and intubated, and we're phoning patients and family members can't come in. And it was crazy. And I ended up going into the ICU at that point. They took the 10 newest hires out of the ER, and they're like, here's the holes that we have to fill, because they got rid of all of the, extra staff. So no PRN, no per diem, no travelers, no part-time. It was like core staff. We have to keep the census low, keep people coming from in and out of the hospitals. Here's the holes we have to fill. ER had the most nurses, so we kind of got dispersed from there. So I was in the ICU during COVID, and it was quite the experience. And I ended up going back to the ER once they were able, census was picking back up, and patients were coming in. And it was like the first few months we weren't having, you saw on the news, and it was like all, we're out of ventilators and there's no beds. And, it wasn't quite like that where I was. It was very it was very eerie for the first 3 months. There was like nobody in the hospital except for like this handful of really, really sick people in the ICU. The ICU was always full, but every other department there was no patients. Um, so I ended up going back to the ER after 5 months in the ICU, and it was already hard before, like nursing they don't quite prepare you for the realities of what you're going into with school. You learn how to pass the NCLEX, right? You don't really learn how to actually be a nurse. So whenever I got back in there, it was like, oh, this is kind of weird now. And long story short, I ended up wanting to move to another state with my best friend. I didn't have the funds saved up. Like, okay, let me go travel nursing. So started traveling. I met my husband while traveling. I ended up traveling for 5 years. In the middle of the traveling, so in 2023, I started, and this is after years of night shift, and you're not eating and drinking on the shifts, and you're in, I did level 1 traumas night shifts. So I was seeing crazy stuff, gunshot wounds and motor vehicle accidents and domestic violence and, pediatric cases, all kinds of things. And I don't think people realize that in an environment like that, if you don't have proper like coping mechanisms or outlets to kind of, get all of that tension out and not bringing it home, you can develop illnesses, which is what happened to me. So I ended up developing an autoimmune condition. Nobody could ever really figure out what was wrong with me. I swore up and down I had endometriosis. I went to OBGYN after OBGYN. They did the scans, they did the labs, they did everything. Everything's fine. And then I ended up developing eczema, so like full body rashes, anxiety, depression, my hair is falling out, all kinds of stuff. So then I ended up doing labs on myself 2 years after the fact, and my labs were normal to a conventional doctor, but whenever you start looking at functional medicine, we're not normal, right? So like once I learned the difference between optimal and normal, I kind of saw like, this is definitely not okay, right? And I ended up, long story short, it was I had breast implants. Started, when you have autoimmune disorders, it starts attacking like the foreign objects in your body if you have them. So I had IUD, I had breast implants. Both of those things were being attacked, and I had to get both of them removed. So since then, I am feeling much, much, much better. But it took me 2 years, 2.5 years of going to GI doctor, to OBGYNs, ER doctor, to all these different people saying your labs are fine, your scans are fine. Here's 800 milligram ibuprofen. Here's some steroid cream for your rashes. Here, nobody could ever really figure out what was wrong with me. And I remember being on a night shift contract and just had all the out of nowhere this excruciating pelvic pain, like doubled over it. I got put into one of the ER rooms. I had an IV started. I had meds. I had all the things. I did the scans. Like, yeah, you're fine. We all know. Maybe just go home and take off tomorrow, and we'll see you back in 2 days. So once I got to that point, I was like, okay. I felt for the patients. We see in the ER, and we call it, you treat and straight, and it's like you just kind of do the things, and you see the patients, you give the meds, and you check the boxes, and, you have more patients in the lobby up to see. And I would have patients who would sit there and like, crying, saying like, nobody's helping me. It's the same thing over and over again. And we're kind of taught like, to kind of shrug your shoulders, and I'm so sorry, it's how it is. Here, you're in the emergency room, maybe go follow up with your primary care doctor. And that was just kind of the line that we learned to tell everybody. And then it happens to you, and you're like, oh, okay. And I'm a nurse, I work for these people, and they're not even helping me, So it turned into a situation where I was like, okay, yeah, this is not quite what I had imagined my career to look like. And I went into it for different reasons, but along the way, I think you just kind of get calloused to the situation until something happens to you with a family member to, or, you have enough, you know, disassociation to be able to look at a situation and say, yeah, that's incorrect. We shouldn't be doing it that way. But that doesn't happen a lot. So got into functional medicine after I started doing a lot of research on how I could fix myself since nobody else wanted help me. Um, and I started with a couple of different courses. This was before I found FNA, and used myself as my own patient. And I prepped my body for breast implant removal, IUD removal. I, quit my job. I completely changed my lifestyle, my diet, everything, and I am probably 98% better than I was. So,
Oh, that's so wonderful. I
yeah.
love hearing that. And I feel you've probably heard a little bit about my story with chronic Lyme. And I remember
Yeah.
when you mentioned that you were like in severe pelvic pain at work. That happened to me too. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
being at work, and I am the type of person like I have a crazy high pain tolerance. Like I have
Yeah.
had like two natural medication-free childbirths, and I was like, oh, it's fine. I
Mm-hmm.
was like crying. I remember crying at work because I had
Mm-hmm.
such severe pelvic pain. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, like having these pain issues and you can't function. And I also remember, when I started working in the field, like for me, for years, I had some random symptoms, but nothing was debilitating. It was just a little
Right.
annoying, but I was fine. And then when I started working in the system and I'm working these crazy shifts, and I really don't know if other employers that are like, yeah, you can't have anything to drink, and yeah, you're going to work 14 hours,
Mm-hmm.
but you just have 30 minutes that you can eat, and it's not even 30 minutes once you like
Oh, it's
go
not.
to the
It's
break
not
room.
even. Never. Yeah.
But we work under these crazy conditions, and then we know
Mm-hmm.
that the hospital setting, with all of that like fluorescent lighting, you're not outside all day. And then I also started out working night shift, which I remember I would, after I would finish my three horrible, god awful, 13, 14-hour shifts, I would come home and I would have these like weird rashes. And I was
Yeah.
having like, I had like this weird rash around my neck, and I was having breathing problems and pelvic pain and all of this stuff. That I also found out that the hospital I worked at, it was a very old hospital. And you would think that hospitals would do a good job with their air quality. Many of them do not. So this was a
Yeah.
very like moldy place, and I found out that there were other employees that were actually hospitalized after working there for having like severe respiratory issues.
Yeah.
But I went through that too. In the medical field, where we're nurses, we know how to talk to doctors. Like we were
Yeah.
trained in this field, and then we're the patient, and then they're like, "Oh, there's nothing that we can do for you." And
Mm-hmm.
I also experienced with all of my stuff and then the Lyme. I also, I mean, I really don't have any, like, I feel great. Like, I don't have any lingering
Mm-hmm.
symptoms. And it makes me wonder, especially with your case, because things like breast implant illness are not on
Mm-hmm.
the radar for
Uh-huh.
conventional medicine. Did you ever think about like what would have happened to you if you were just like, oh, functional medicine is quackery, conventional medicine, that's the light, the truth, and the way, and I'm just going to listen to what they have to tell me. Like, what do you think would have happened to you if you just went with what they were recommending for you?
That's honestly kind of scary to think about. I don't really know. I Going back to like the working conditions, I think that, and I actually, it's funny you say that. I just made a video about this yesterday, 2 days ago, about these working conditions that we're put under. I think that we are taught and told like it's what you signed up for. It is what it is. And you look at the working conditions that nurses are put under, and it being a woman dominated field too. That's a whole other can of worms, whole other thing. But like our bodies just do not work the same as males, right? So whenever we're put in these high stress environments from fluorescent lights, and we're not eating and we're not drinking and we're not, your circadian rhythm is not, not where it's supposed to be. I think we kind of just, all these weird little symptoms we start having, we talk it up to, oh, it's just stress, or it's just my job, or it's just, it's what we signed up for, because that's what they tell us we signed up for, right? And had I not kind of fought back with some of these doctors, I probably would have been. I mean, I was already pretty ill. I can't imagine like where I would have been had I not listened to myself, or listened to myself enough to where I didn't do my own research and kind of just listened to everybody else. It got to a point where people told me, maybe you need to start, getting on medications. Maybe you need to go have a mental evaluation. Maybe you need to, all these kinds of crazy things. I've never been one to have like mental health issues or anything. In the last 2 years, it was like my husband was probably ready to put me in a loony bin. I was unwell, and it just, I mean, skin rashes all over. I still have, that's like my one thing. I still have like discoloration on my arms and legs from eczema scarring, but I don't, the flare ups are like not there anymore, but just kept progressively getting worse and worse and worse. And hair's falling out. And I just couldn't, I'd wake up and it would be just doomsday all day. I'm like, I don't know why I'm sad. I don't know why I'm sick. I don't know why I'm anxious. I don't know why I'm having like these stabbing pains in my chest and then my stomach and, all of these things that was just like you're living to get through, the next day, the next day, the next day to get a paycheck, to pay the bills, to just kind of keep going over and over and over again. And it just got to a point where like this is not if your career is putting your mental and physical health on the line, I don't think it's ever worth it. So that's just kind of the point where I got with me.
I remember when I was going through nursing school, and I remember okay, so after my first semester, I was like, I don't know if I want to go back, but I was like, I did all these prerequisites, and I was thinking, I was like, there's a lot you can do with nursing, but I remember wanting to leave after my first semester and my first clinical rotation just because of how miserable the nurses were. And
That too.
it's such a toxic environment, and there is so much there's so much bullying. And I remember a nurse telling me like, hey, yeah, being a nurse is probably going to take 10 years off of your life. And then another thing, the nurses that I was around, so many of them are not healthy themselves and have a ton of chronic health conditions, and are also, many of them are pharmaceutical dependent. And then I later learned that nurses on average are more likely to be obese. They're more likely to have chronic health conditions than the general public in the United States of America, which we are like the sickest, developed country. So that's pretty bad. And one thing that I will say I do love about nursing is we have a very high level of skill set, and we are very well versed in working with the patient and or client population. So I think there's so much that we can do when we really open up the door to holistic medicine, which to me I think is common sense medicine. And I know with chronic Lyme, when and I talk to my husband about this frequently, I am like, I feel so good now. And if I had not have sought after functional medicine, like if I was just digging my heels, because a lot of people are digging their heels in right now about conventional medicine and about how like we just need to keep pushing forward with something that doesn't work. But with chronic Lyme disease, they are finally recognizing it as, I call it like post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, something like that. But they don't even recognize the need to treat the infection. They're like, just give them antidepressants and pain meds. And I'm like, that's stupidest thing that I've ever heard of. Like, I cannot imagine just being like, oh yeah, I'll just drug myself up the rest of my life and I'm just gonna, leave this stealth infection to just, do what it's going to do to my body and like destroy my body. But with when you got the training with, when you became a functional medicine nurse, can you tell us about, I know that you are primarily helping other nurses right now, but can you tell me the difference that you're seeing as far as like your profession now versus what it was like when you were in the conventional system?
Yeah. So I started out, whenever I first started, I knew this is kind of what I wanted to do. And I don't know if it was just because I wasn't, I don't know, looking in the right places or not, I don't really know. I feel like I searched high and low for some sort of functional medicine training for nurses. And, I, leading up to this, I was under the speculation that maybe I had to be a nurse practitioner to do it. And that's because that's what everybody tells you. So I did my first functional medicine training I started in December of 24 and I finished the beginning of March in 25. Um, the clinical education was great, but I felt like I didn't really know, what to do once I had the education. And then the credentialing for it was just a certificate of completion. I really wanted some, an accreditation behind it. Again, I don't think that's necessary for the field, but I think for nurses, like we like having the validation and then, the letters and like something that says like, hey, I did the work and I have the education for this. So I ended up doing a second one. And I never even finished that one because it was just an ungodly amount of money. Like there was no way that an average person could have made that one work. And I just didn't feel like it was great for the nursing scope. Um, so once I started, and now I'm with you, and I love FNA, but it's really turned into I I get my patients and my nurse client ask me this a lot, and I tell people like this. I did this in under a year, and my life is a night and day 180 complete difference. Now I went from working night shift and chronically ill, and you're not eating, you're not drinking. I wasn't working out anymore because I was either too tired and I'm at home sleeping, or if I do have the day off, I just feel bad. I feel, I wasn't well. So I didn't, I just feel like I was just like this withering away of a human trying to stay in the job that I thought I worked so hard for this. And I had all these, trials and tribulations during nursing school. And I did all the things to get here, and I did the work, and now I did this, and then I was charged, and now I'm trying, like I climbed my way up to this mountain that I thought was like, it's going to be the top of my mountain. And I got there and I was like, this is not what I thought it was going to be, or wrong mountain. And once I started this, and I think I'm glad that there's more information, more coaching, and more training, and more courses coming out, and people are starting to see that this is an option for nurses. Because whenever even just a year ago, I feel like I couldn't find anything. And it's now that there's a little bit more guidance on the subject, and nurses are starting to understand that they do have options and there are things they can do outside the bedside if it isn't necessarily conventional care. Like there are other ways to help people with positive health outcomes than just um, keeping them in a hospital and medications and procedures and surgeries and all of the things. But now it's been less than a year since I had started, and I work a few days a week. I work from home. I make more money than I ever did as a travel nurse. I have time. It's completely night and day. Like when a year ago, when I told myself I wanted to start something on my own, I gave myself a list of not even just professional life, but like what do you want in your personal life, and what can you do with your professional life that's going to help you get, match and alignment with everything in your life, because if you're dying to make a living, then it's like, what are you even doing? Um, so doing this, it's like, I definitely feel like I hit the jackpot with career and with life. And it's like, you still get to help people. And I still, I feel like I'm helping people and helping nurses and an ethical way. I'm not, it's not like, oh, this is the protocol and this is what we're going to do. And like, you're trying to like, the doctor walks out and the patients are looking at you like, SOS, help me. Like, what does that mean? Or do I have to do that? And you're legally as a nurse, we're not allowed to, really give an opinion or really, help them, you know, get through that other than just education. And sometimes we get reprimanded for the education we do give them, even if it is the truth. Um, so now I feel like I have more like freedom of speech. Number one, I I feel like I'm able to educate properly and what's ethical and what's right and correct, and give them options on A, B, C, and D to look at everything and make their own informed decisions versus this is what you have to do and this is the only way to do it. So that was a big problem that I had was feeling like I had to kind of fall in line and educate on the things that they wanted me to be educating on and not what I really thought or really felt or knew were to be true, more or less truer than what was actually happening. So all around my life is just completely 100% better, like in every aspect, like, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, it's been night and day difference. So
And for our listeners, if you are working, and even if you're not in healthcare, because I know I have a variety of our audience varies from nurses, other healthcare professionals to
yeah.
people who are not in the medical field but may be interested in wellness. if anyone listening is working at a soul sucking job, let me tell you, it is not worth it. Just when you think about like the impact that that's going to have on like your physical health, and then whatever is happening to you emotionally, spiritually, physically, that is going to trickle down and that is going to affect the other people around you. And I know for me, now as a mom with three kids, I also am like, well, I hit the jackpot here, because when you start your own business, if you put your heart into it and you are a hard worker, you're going to see that return. And I remember when I used to come on shift, everyone knew that when I would get there, that things are getting done. And I remember the supervisors, because they know that I am, get stuff done, kind of high achiever, they would always pair me with other nurses that just did just enough to get by, because they knew that I would pick up the rest of the workload. And for me, I felt like I was taken advantage of year after year after year. And then when raises, come down the pipeline, they give you like a little bit of extra money each year, but it's not based on merit. Everyone would get the same. And so now it's so great, because it's like, when you have your own business, you don't really have to take orders from anyone else. Of course, being a nurse, like we're both, licensed and regulated. So we're not just doing whatever we want. We have a licensing board, but there's still like so much of what we're doing with wellness is through education, and that is like a universally accepted nursing scope of practice. So there's just a lot we can do. But I do want to pause just for a moment, because it's about time to take a break. I wanted to remind our listeners, if you are interested in training with me at the Functional Nurse Academy, I do have open enrollment. So you can check out functionalnurseacademy.com. And again, this is the most comprehensive training on the market currently for nurses. And it includes comprehensive functional medicine training, as well as business mentorship. All of our graduates get 90 nursing CEs and are eligible for multiple functional medicine board certification titles. So be sure to check out functionalnurseacademy.com. This show is also syndicated on America Out Loud Talk Radio, on the Nurses Report radio show and podcast. So you can also find me there on any major app. Hello and welcome back. This is Melissa Schreibfetter. Today I am joined by one of my students at the Functional Nurse Academy, Janie, who left conventional medicine through her own personal experience with chronic health issues that she recovered holistically, and she opened up her own functional nurse business, and now she is also helping other functional nurses on the business aspect of functional nursing. Welcome back, Janie.
Thank you.
Well, it's so great to connect again, and I did want to touch base just on your experience so far with the Functional Nurse Academy. So could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So I love FNA. And what I was doing before was I had taken two functional medicine courses, certificates before this one. And both of them I found had, pros and cons to both. I never found exactly what I was looking for in either one of them. The first one was great. The clinical education aspect was great, because it was the first time I'd ever heard of anything like this. I have a whole notebook just full of notes. It was nice, but it was it was one of those courses where it felt very much like a semester of nursing school. So you had to, submit your discussion boards and essays and posts and be online at certain times. So for somebody who was working full time, at me, it was difficult to be able to participate fully in it. And then once I was done, I felt like I knew the information I needed to know, but I had no idea how to apply it, or if I wanted to do something on my own. I have no clue what I'm doing. And then I didn't get a board certification out of it, which I really wanted. So I went to another one, and this is the the gold standard of functional medicine, the big guru name. And they have recently opened up the doors to their certifications for nurses, but they have not changed the curriculum to reflect a nursing scope of practice. So I found that I was paying an ungodly amount of money for information that did not apply to me. And it was just really long. It was really expensive. If I had not taken any sort of certifications before, I feel like I would have been really lost in the sauce with the info that you were getting. So if I didn't even complete that one. It was a course by course thing. So I still have more classes to complete if I wanted to finish with them. While I was in these two courses, I made my guide. So it was like a startup guide for functional medicine nurses. So you have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea what functional nursing is. How do you get from point A to point B? What are the options? What do you need to do? What do you need to look for? So I was doing extensive research on it, and I found the FNA in this and put it in my guide, and ended up having nurses sign up for FNA, then come back to me telling me like, "Oh my God, I love FNA," and then we connected, and now I'm in FNA and I'm still not even completely done with it. And I kick myself in the butt. And I'm like, I wish I would have found this one first, because I would have saved so much time. I would have saved so much money. You get the business aspect on the back end, you get the credentialing, you get the help. It's not, I tell people now, I love that you guys are a family owned business too. I coming from working corporate and working giant, conventional healthcare. I don't feel like we need to keep making CEOs billionaires. That's just my, thing. And I feel like people like to put these giant hefty price tags on the things that are, some nurses are still, paycheck to paycheck. We don't get paid appropriately. We're working long hours. We don't have time to put into things. And if there's start dates and start times and, it can be a lot. And it can be very discouraging for nurses who want to go back and do something like that and spend their time and money when they don't have the means to do it efficiently or effectively. So I really, really appreciate FNA with the structure that's in it, with how thorough it is, with the case studies, with, I'm even in just like the first or second module, or, learning about the labs and how to look at the labs and how do you order labs as a nurse. And that was like the big burning question of, do I go to NP school or do I stay a nurse? How am I supposed to order labs for people? And how am I supposed to do all of these things as a registered nurse? And you completely covered that in like the very beginning of the course. So all in all, it's been amazing. And everybody that comes to me, I'm like, if you are LPN, RN, NP, if you have a nursing license, you need to do FNA. Like there's no other, like don't even look at the other options that's on there. That is going to be your best pick. And then it's the most affordable on the market too, for like what you haven't priced at. You definitely could bump it way up if you wanted to, but I appreciate the conversation we had months ago. And something that you said to me when I asked you about that, you said, God is my God, money is not my God. And I repeat that to all of my nurses that ask me about that, because that's something that resonated with me. So, and that's kind of where I get back to not making CEOs billionaires, millionaires, all these people who just really don't actually care about you or what you're doing, and you just want a paycheck kind of thing. And that I really appreciate that you guys put so much heart and effort into it and make it accessible for nurses.
Thank you so much for all of your kind words. It makes me so happy when, you know, uh, nurses enroll in the program and they are happy with the product. And I tell my students this frequently. I'm like, as a business owner, my worst nightmare is accepting money from someone and then someone not being happy with the product.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
That is why I feel like I go into a frenzy like every couple of months. And I start like updating things and adding things. And then my husband is like, put it down. It's fine. But yeah. Again, this is something else with nurses, and it really, it really gets my goat. So, what is happening with nurses? So it is like well known that nurses are probably one of like the least satisfied professions, and when it comes to marketing, unfortunately, what I have seen is there are other programs, to apparently help nurses get out of sick care and help nurses make money that were not designed by nurses. And they're not really even appropriate for nurses, but they're being marketed to nurses because we are super easy to target on Meta, because you can tell who's a nurse. Like we usually are in other nurse Facebook groups. Nurses are proud to be nurses, even though the system mistreats us. So usually we'll have that somewhere on our profile. But, I was hearing from nurses who, felt like they got scammed or maybe went to another program, but then they couldn't actually use that program to generate any revenue for themselves. So then they're just stuck in the system and still unhappy. So, but I really do believe, and I say this like, I probably say this every other show, so sorry that I sound like a broken record, guys. But I do believe that God is using the nurses to clean up what's going on with this country because there are so many sick and suffering people, and there's so many suffering children. And I really think that God gives us all gifts, but it's really hard to use our God given gifts when we are struggling day to day with chronic illness and with so many businesses too. I mean, I have worked for, so I'm not going to mention the company name because they probably would try to sue me if I did. But anyway, I have worked for large corporations as a nurse, and I am like the whole corporate nonsense. You're just a number, and I feel like so many of these big companies, they may say they care about the individual, but at the end of the day, they care about the bottom line, and that is money. And I think that that is why so many nurses, like good nurses, were fired during COVID because of those ridiculous mandates. Because instead of caring about like the health and the well being of that person, they're looking at each person as a number and like, are we going to take a financial loss if we don't have them do this and whatnot? So, but I do think that having nurses kind of go out as, small business owners running, concierge functional nurse services, there's so much that we can do, for our clients to get them well. And I also, when you told me that, so I know that you have your functional nurse practice. So you said that you are still seeing clients, but you're not accepting new clients. Is that right? Okay. Okay, great. And you mentioned that you've kind of, so you're seeing clients, which I think is great to help with like your clinical skill set and everything, but then you're really focusing on professional development for nurses, which is amazing, especially the social media. Because I mean, so many of us, I think maybe like the young 20s nurses are probably just fine with that. For me, being a millennial nurse, so many of us, the social media part is like kind of a nightmare. So can you tell me about that business venture?
Yeah, so I started out seeing my one-to-one clients. I opened up an IV lounge back in March. I was doing IV therapy for patients and I was doing in-person one-to-ones, which I loved, right? I still wanted like the hands-on. I live in a small community, so I felt like I kind of knew all of my patients, which was nice. But it kind of got to a point where with the type of setting I live in, there is definitely a glass ceiling to it. And I was like, I know I could be doing more. I know, like, I kind of wanted to like expand a little bit. So then I went online and I started doing more telehealth, more, one to one, and whether it's Practice Better or Zoom or whatever. And was posting a lot about that on my Instagram page. I made a brand new one whenever I started my page. And I started having a slew of nurses message me saying, like, I have never heard of functional nursing. How do I do this? How do I, and then once you get into it, like, okay, I'd say, and this was the problem I had after my first certification. Like, I know how to be a nurse. I know the clinical data. I know the knowledge behind this. How am I supposed to, we're not, we go in, we clock out, we follow the orders, we check the boxes. And then once you're done and you go home. We've never been taught anything about business or being an entrepreneur or how to market yourself or how to get clients. We've not been taught any of that. So it was definitely a huge learning curve for me for trying to figure out, okay, what am I supposed to do or how am I supposed to do this? So I just went online and I started a brand new Instagram. I had taken some social media marketing classes back in 2023. This is when the first time I thought I wanted to quit nursing just because I was, so sick and tired of it. I was like trying all these, like reaching for all of these different things. Like how can I get out of this essentially? So I did have a little bit of knowledge on just how to use like Instagram, like the very, very basics. And the more I started using it, I started learning new things. I started taking more courses and more, just to learn the ins and outs of it and how to properly talk to the type of client that you're wanting to bring in. And so my patient, I ended up being on a wait list for patients, and then nurses were just, I mean, I would have over 100 DMs a day from nurses asking questions or wanting to get into it. So I started feeling kind of a pool of like, okay, I'm only one nurse and I can only help so many patients versus if I help the nurses, then that's going to multiply tenfold to all the other patients that we can help. So I was like, okay, there's definitely a gap here with learning the educational information and then actually applying it and creating the business out of it, because that's the end goal, right? Is to be able to get out of whatever situation you're in, to be able to work for yourself, but you have to know how to do that properly and efficiently and something that's going to work for you and still not burn you out on the back end. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 6 months or so, is really trying to like tweak my services and tweak the stuff that I do to be able to show people how easy it really can be. And a lot of it is overthinking, or if you're, we get on social media and we see all these influencers and you're like a day in the life and what am I wearing and you have to kind of like completely wipe what you think about being online. And definitely just like learning functional medicine, it's definitely an unlearning and relearning how to use that, how to use it properly. But once you go online, it is like, I mean, the floodgates open. There's billions of people online every single day. Every other person you talk to has an Instagram, has Facebook, has TikTok, has whatever. And that's where you're going to find your clients. So that's what I do now.
Yeah, so I have this conversation with my students a lot because I have so many of them that are kind of like for me, I cannot tell you how much I dislike social media. The only reason I am on there is because I have a business. But
Yeah.
it really, when I was a brand new functional nurse and no one knew what I was doing, that is how I got my initial paying clients, with social media. I mean, it is like one of the most amazing business tools because you're able to access just a pool of so many people that may be interested in your services. And then also, like, if you're scaling larger programs, marketing on social also gives a really amazing opportunity for a really good return on investment. So there's so many business tools, but then things are like always changing on social media. And I usually, like, I have students that will say, well, I'm not good at tech. Do I need to have a website? Do I need to have a social media presence? And I don't think that you need to be like influencer level where you need to have like
No, yeah,
hundreds of thousands of followers or anything like that, because you may have a much, much, much smaller following, but you may have a very engaged audience. And then also, the social media groups in itself, like the Facebook groups, are also a great way to connect. But I did want to ask you, so when I first connected with you and I saw
yeah.
that your social was just like blowing up. I mean, I think that you had, what was it? Like, what was it? Was it like 2 million views or higher? Like, how high of a reach are you getting on your social?
Well, so whenever you have a creator or a business account, you're able to see every 30 days that your reach that you are getting with, Instagram, and I'm up to 19 million right now.
90 million.
19,
Oh,
1 9. Yeah.
oh, okay. 19. Well, that's still like amazing.
19.
19.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a massive reach. And then also you did what was the most viral post that you did?
The most viral one, I have one video, and it honestly has nothing to do with functional nursing, or it's just nursing in general. And it's about toxicity in healthcare and in the workplace, and it's how, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the interview with like being a nursing student and just going in and the nurses are so mean, or just, want nothing to do with what's going on, or, very belittling, or, whatever. There's always going to be that person. But I feel like, and help for whatever reason in healthcare. And I think there's a lot of external factors that go into that. You're burnt out, you're tired, you've got family issues. There's all kinds of things that are happening, and you're going into a job to take care of somebody else and you can't take care of yourself. And those are the things that play into it. But it, it was a video about, you know, we're here to help people get better. If there's something for you that's, making you act this way towards other people, maybe we need to work on yourself a little bit. Um, and that video went pretty crazy viral. I think it's at 12 million views.
So how are you coming up with the ideas? Are you just like just sitting down and like writing down like a script, or do you just open up your phone and just
Yeah. So I try to be a little bit more strategic about it now, just because at the beginning, you don't know what you're doing and you have all these ideas come to you. And I was writing things down of ideas that would pop into my head. And so now I have a little bit more of like a strategic plan where I'm not online so much. I used to be, I was on my phone 24/7 just because I didn't know. Again, it's like you're leaving one type of burnout for another type of burnout if you don't know how to do it properly and how to do it effectively. Um, so much better now. But back then, yeah, I would, I had all of these things that I would just think about of like, things that happen to me or things that, I have a part-time education job with nursing students. So if being back in the bedside work setting with them, I still get to see, the things, and I see some of the bullying and I see some of the things that are happening with patients. And so it'll either remind me of something that has happened to me in the past, or it highlights an issue that I'm seeing, and I'll make some sort of video about it. So a lot of the ones that I have done that go more viral tend to be a little bit more controversial, but and it's I think part of it is I a lot of the things that I do on my social media, it's like I will say the things that people are thinking, but nobody else wants to say kind of thing, because I'm not in a position anymore where I have to fear for, my job, which is, not, again, freedom of speech to be able to talk about like what's going on and not, being fearful of, losing the job and losing the paycheck and losing, or getting fired or whatever. So yeah, I just every week, like now I try to have a little bit more consistency with what I'm talking about, since I do have a bit of a bigger following now, and there, people expect certain topics to be talked about. But back then it was very like, what is a problem that is happening at the bedside or in healthcare that nobody else wants to talk about or bring light to. So that was kind of where a lot of my content ideas came from in the beginning.
yeah, yeah. And also another thing you mentioned was that there's so many nurses that they know that there are some things going on that are not ethical in the healthcare system, but there's so
Mhm.
much fear of your employer retaliating against you.
Mhm.
And for me, when I started speaking out about things, especially I'm an advocate for those who have been injured from vaccines. And I talk a lot
Yeah,
about vaccine safety, and that is a big no-no. I mean,
that's
I
a
feel
big
like
no
it's
no. Yeah.
more acceptable now because of the COVID vaccine debacle. But when I first
Mhm.
started speaking about this, I mean, you're talking
Oh,
about
I
people
know.
that
Yeah.
would ostracise you, get you fired, even
Yeah.
report you to the board, even if you are saying truthful things. But there is a
Mhm.
lot of fear mongering just about talking about, these are. It's not like a political issue. It is an ethical issue.
Yeah.
If
Mhm.
there are certain, procedures or, certain pharmaceuticals that are being pushed on people that haven't been thoroughly safety tested, or if that informed consent portion is lacking, which it is when people are being, coerced to take certain medical treatments or
Yeah.
other products. But, that is another thing about being not being dependent on that system, because I
Mhm.
don't think it's good for the soul when something is not right, that you feel like you are being muzzled and you're being told that you're not allowed to speak about that. Or I've even heard from other nurses and from patients that when we talk about certain things like vaccines, I have heard from nurses that they're being discouraged from telling the patients about what the known adverse reactions are, because if the patient knows the known adverse reactions, they may choose not to receive that vaccine. And I mean, these things are so ludicrous and it really goes against ethical behavior. And yeah. So when you do speak your mind about things that are going on in healthcare, are you receiving? Well, this is a totally loaded question, but well, actually, asking you the question doesn't make sense. It just makes sense for me to be like, what kind of pushback do you get?
Um, eh, it definitely has lightened up a little bit. I will say that at the
Good.
beginning, I feel like, and this was something that I try to teach now and some of my social media courses and stuff, but it's not so much on how to post and how to do the things. It's like you get into it and you don't realize that you are going to get backlash being somebody in healthcare and talking about something that's more controversial. And the first 4 or 5 months that I was doing this, I had a ton of doctors and nurse practitioners and PAs and whoever, people who just had an opposing opinion to me and would comment just nasty things or message me nasty things or, make videos about me saying crazy things. And I think though, whenever you take yourself out of that situation and you're able to recognize that there is an ethical issue, regardless of what you've been taught or how much you paid for your degree, or, if you can't take a step back out of the situation and see that there could be a potential issue and you're not maybe asking more questions. And I think that's where the problem comes in. And it's not over who's a nurse, who's not a nurse, who's a doctor, who's not a doctor. It's, I think that ethics and humanity have become an option in healthcare, and that should never have become an option, in the first place. That should be like a non-negotiable. And I think, back to what you were saying, and I think that's part of why a lot of nurses, I think nurses go into this for the right reasons typically, and we're getting told that, we're burnt out, but really I think it's moral injury. It's where we're going to work and we're knowing there's things that are happening and going on that we either can't speak up about or we have to do because of protocols, or we're going to get fired if we don't do them, versus like, it's not, it's a system issue. It's not a nurse issue. So I think we're being told that it is a nurse issue and you just need more sleeping. You just need to take your PTO. You need to, you need to do all these things. It's, part of being a nurse. And it's, I think there's a lot of gaslighting in the healthcare system and trying to make it sound like you signed up for this. It is what it is, versus the system doesn't want to take accountability for what's actually going on, and we're just giving it a different name.
So I did a show on this. It was probably like almost a year ago, but with the 2025 Nursing Code of Ethics, there was actually a revision saying that if there was, say, a protocol that was unethical, that the nurses can actually go against the that unethical policy at the organization. So I was so like, I wondered, I was like, did somebody find Jesus? Because this happened after all of the things that went on with COVID, where, there were things, and I talked about this probably a couple of weeks ago. My first job was in pediatrics. That did not work out because I cannot stick kids. I cannot do invasive procedures on kids. So I did not last long there. But anyway, in the morning, I had to go over all of the medication orders, and I had to compare to confirm that there was not a medication error, because when we are dosing little bodies, we must make sure that they are dosed appropriately. So if the doctor made an error, which it happens, I mean, we have checks and balances. We're supposed to have checks and balances in the healthcare system, because if a doctor wrote an order for a medication dose that was too high, I would not just be like, well, I follow orders and go administer that to my patient and risk harming them and risk a sentinel event because that's the doctor's order. But what we are seeing is we have these very large organizations, pharmaceutical companies that did not do their homework. And a classic example of this that I rant about like every other show is the hepatitis B vaccine and the aluminum content. It does exceed the FDA's recognized safety limits for the aluminum hydroxide. Since it's, intramuscular, we have a much higher absorption rate. And I actually have a student currently enrolled in FNA who is a whistleblower, and she got written up for refusing to give that vaccine to an infant because she said the level of adjuvant exceeds what the FDA says is safe, and they were basically like, you need to do it anyway. You need to abide by what the policy is and what the hospital says to do. And so I was actually surprised that they did not fire her and she got written up, but that's how ridiculous it is. And again, like the moral injury, so many nurses are under pressure to do things that they know are not correct. And then I honestly see a lot of darkness, honestly, in the healthcare system. Like, I think that there's something else going on. And I think that the whole follow the science has become God for a lot of people, where they're really kind of like pushing back, like, morals and the right thing to do just to follow this system. Do you see that too, where you see that people are becoming like overly indoctrinated into this system?
Yes, I feel like the term follow the science has become just a big broad label term to be able to, again, like gaslighting and manipulating into scaring people or scaring nurses or scaring whoever into like that's the answer. That's the right answer. And if you believe anything else, then you need to be. I've had so many messages from people who were like, you need to be turned into the board of nursing, you need your license revoked, you need, and I'm not even like all gung ho once, I've even like pulled in the reins on a lot of things that I do talk about and do say, 'cause I try to make myself a little bit more educational toward, more, business stuff now versus, talking about all the crazy different things that I was seeing, at the bedside. And during COVID, I remember the first thing I ever saw, and aside from the vaccine mandates, was one of the medications we were given for, which was protocol for COVID patients. So I remember being in the ER and they're tubing down um, remdesivir, which was the new antiviral IV medication we were giving to people who had COVID. So even if it didn't matter if you were symptomatic, asymptomatic. So I remember having people who had no symptoms but got swabbed for positive for COVID, and it was part of protocol. So the pharmacy would tube down the remdesivir, and they're like, "Okay, you got to give this to the patient now," and they would want us to tell them, regardless if you take it or not, it's already been bagged, labeled with your name, all of it. It's been ordered for you. This is a really expensive medication, and regardless if you take it or not, you're going to have to pay for it. So the patients would feel like they had to do it because they're slapping this $10,000 label on this bag for people. And we were using that for, I think we started to take notice much later on, like closer to like the year mark, and people who got these doses of remdesivir by day 8 or 9, they were on like dialysis or something, and a kidney failure, complete kidney shutdown in the ICU between day 8 and 10. So we're like, oh, we're saying, oh, COVID caused this kidney failure. I'm like, that's respiratory virus. It's not, why are we getting kidney failure? So there was this whole thing going on where it's like people knew it was happening, people knew, and it was just very historical, So a lot of times I would get those medications down, and again, being fearful of losing my job. I was still a newer nurse. I was still under 2 years, and that was like my first or second travel contract, and I just didn't want to step on any toes. But I'd get the medications, and I would see the patients and the families like looking at me with like big eyes and like, is that really necessary? And I would like completely off the record, if that were my grandma, if that were my mom, I would tell them to not take it. And I would just let them make the decision for themselves, and I felt like that, that was something I only said that to patients that I was comfortable with, right? Where I felt like I had a good rapport, if it was somebody where I felt like maybe they would, say, oh, well, your nurse said this, or, something like that. But every time I remember spiking that medication and hanging it up on there, I just felt like this immense sense of guilt where like, I know that this is a problem and I have to do it anyway, or else I'm going to get in trouble. So,
And it is surprising to me that individuals in the hospital with seniority, like the medical doctors, were not saying anything about this, and I do think that some people still are in denial and they're like, no, no, it's COVID. And again, I am not a fan of the World Health Organization. Okay. But I know that not everybody at the WHO is evil, but the WHO, who has significant conflicts of interest with the pharmaceutical company and a lot of other things. But anyway, even they were like, don't use remdesivir in these cases. And then the US is still using it. And it was just like normal part of the protocol everywhere. So, but one of the big pharma tricks with remdesivir. So they knew that it caused renal failure and worsened outcomes. But in the trials, when they were testing it for COVID, they discontinued the trial before the renal failure started. So that's sometimes how they'll conduct trials. Like they know that it may cause this sentinel event or this horrible adverse reaction, but then they will just discontinue the trial before that starts to occur, and then they'll use that as evidence for safety. And again, of course, if I was hit by a bus, I would go to the hospital, and there are good people in the system, but we all need to be aware that sometimes these things happen. And, honestly, I think that it's great to have more and more nurses working on this outpatient basis in wellness, because if we help to get people well enough, then they may not end up needing to be hospitalized for things like respiratory viruses and whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, we are about time. We're about at the end of the show, but I did want to ask, I know after today's show, I'm going to have like a ton of nurses that are going to want to reach out to you and work with you. Can you tell me how a nurse would go about working with you, and what's the best way for them to find you?
So the best way to find me is going to be through my Instagram handle. So it is at Florida Functional RN. My email is also listed on there. So it's Jamie at flfunctional.com. So that's my private work email. I do answer all my emails. The easiest way to get in with me would be to go through my link to my stand score, which is on my Instagram bio. And I have the two different options on there for, starting in holistic medicine, starting in functional medicine, or the social media side. There's a combo. And then I also offer consulting calls. So everything is listed in my Instagram though.
Oh, that's so wonderful, because again, like even when I am training nurses through FNA, I mean, there's always going to be ongoing needs, especially on the business side, because things change so frequently. So it's so great that like we now have like a trusted source within our community that we can send our nurses to. And you happened to cut out when you said your email. What was the email again? And I'll put this in the show notes too.
Okay. It's Jamie, Jamie at flfunctional.com.
Okay, awesome. So I will put that in the show notes. And any last words of advice for nurses that are looking to leave their toxic work environment and do functional medicine or something holistically based on their own?
Yeah. So I would just say, just find somebody that has done it, has been there, knows the same problems that you're having. I promise there's a ton of us out there. You have options. You do not have to climb the, mainstream career clinical ladder that you have with having an RN license. I don't think that, we're taught to do, very specific streamline kind of thing. And we've never been taught or told or educated on the other options we have. So I tell everybody, like, explore your options. Don't think you're stuck to one thing. You can change your mind over and over and over again. And there's so many different ways and avenues to still help people and make an income and, have your life and your mental health.
Yes, there's so many opportunities.
Yeah.
And well, thank you for coming on the show. This was so great
Thank
to
you for
connect.
having me.
And
Yeah.
I just love your story. I think it's so inspiring. That is all the time that we have today. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, if you want to learn more about the Functional Nurse Academy, please feel free to register for our next live webinar, and you will see that link in the show notes. You can also check out Functional Nurse Academy on our social media platforms or on our website at functionalnurseacademy.com. Until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless.